Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 45 in 45 minutes, 15 Myths and Misconceptions Challenged. My name is Michael Nevin. I am the chairman of the 1745 Association, whose origins date back to 1945, when, at the bicentenary of the raising of the standard at Glenfinnan, our founders decided to create a society that would seek to challenge the dominant Hanoverian narrative of the Jacobite era, preserve the memory of those who participated in the rising of 1745, and mark historical sites associated with it. We have our own symbol, which is a six-petaled Jacobite white rose. We have our own coat of arms, duly registered and authorised by the Lord Lion. And of course we have our own tartan, the 1745 Association tartan, to keep us nice and warm on a chilly day like this. Now, this gallery contains the finest collection of Jacobite portraiture in any single place anywhere in the world. And the great pictures that hang here help us understand what happened during a cathartic period of British history. My story begins in the year 1688, the year that begins what today we call the Jacobite era. Myth number one: the last time England was conquered by a foreign invader was in 1066. This myth has been successfully challenged by Lucy Worsley in her recent series on the biggest fibs in British history, when she demonstrated that the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688 was in fact a foreign invasion of our islands. Earlier historians have made the same point. Writing in 2000, Count Nikolai Tolstoy commented, and I quote, "In 1688, the King of England was driven from his throne by his son-in-law, the Prince of Orange, who invaded and conquered England with the most powerful foreign fleet and army ever seen in northern waters. Until the spring of 1690, London remained under rigorous Dutch military occupation, no English regiment being permitted within 20 miles of the capital. The cabal of English traitors who collaborated with the invader could no more have effected the so-called Glorious Revolution, unaided by enemy troops, than could Dr. Quisling have governed Norway in the absence of the German army." Strong words indeed, which leads to a further question: why did William of Orange want to overthrow his own father-in-law? A question answered by this portrait by Nicolas de la Guillière of King James's son, James Francis Edward Stuart, born on June 10th, 1688. So how did this sweet wee baby become the most controversial newborn in the whole of British history? Myth number two: baby James was an impostor smuggled into the Queen's bedchamber in a warming pan. Anyone ever tried to put a baby into a warming pan? No? Perhaps just as well, because try as you might, a baby won't fit into a warming pan. You can squeeze him, you can squash him, you can bend him or fold him. He's too big. And yet his sisters, Anne and Mary, put about the scurrilous rumour that this is exactly what happened, and so little Jamie here wasn't really their baby brother at all. He was a son of King James's second wife, Mary of Modena, whereas Anne and Mary's mum was his first wife, Anne Hyde, who had passed away a few years earlier. And whereas they had been baptized as Protestants, James was baptized as a Catholic. And so we're faced with classic second marriage syndrome. The children of the first marriage don't entirely approve of their new stepmom, and what they particularly dislike is her giving birth to a baby boy who stands to inherit the estate and take the fortune that they thought was coming to them, along with a few other minor baubles like the crown jewels and the thrones of England, Scotland and Ireland. Which leads on to myth number three. 1688 was the year of a glorious revolution. Mary of Modena was a Catholic and King James was a Catholic, and unlike his older brother Charles II, he openly professed his faith. At that time, under the laws of England, Catholics could not practice their religion, they could not hold public office, they could not vote or sit in Parliament. James wanted to end the discrimination against the Catholics and other religious minorities, and in 1687 proposed a new Act for the Liberty of Conscience. In a speech to persuade Parliament to pass this Act, King James said, and I quote, "Suppose there should be a law made that all black men be imprisoned. It would be unreasonable, and we have as little reason to quarrel with other men for being of different religious opinions as for being of different complexions." To us today, King James's stand against racial and religious discrimination would seem laudable. And indeed, it was supported by other religious minorities who also suffered religious discrimination in 1688, including Quakers, Baptists, Congregationalists, Episcopalians, and even one religion not generally regarded as particularly sympathetic to the Jacobites, the Presbyterians. But not the state church, the Church of England. When James ordered Anglican bishops to read his declaration of indulgence from their pulpits, 7 of them refused to obey. In response, James did something that even today, 330 years later, seems unbelievably stupid. He charged them with treason. This at a time when the memory of Anglican martyrs burnt at the stake by Mary Tudor was still very much alive. The 7 bishops were acquitted of the charges against them, but the damage had been done. The Anglican establishment appealed to James's son-in-law, William of Orange, to overthrow King James. The truth of the matter is that the coup of 1688 was neither glorious nor a revolution, but a squalid family squabble where the winners were supported by an Anglican establishment intent on suppressing dissenting opinion. However, this version of events would throw into question the legitimacy of the ruling elite. So Whig historians from Macaulay onwards were given generous sinecures to propagate an alternative narrative of a glorious revolution to overthrow a tyrannical monarch bent on implementing a regime of Catholic absolutism. But in any act of betrayal, and particularly family betrayal, there is likely to be a sting in the tail. And so it proved. King James's elder daughter, Mary, passed away aged just 32 in 1694. Her husband, William of Orange, was undone by a little gentleman in a black velvet waistcoat in 1702. The throne then passed to Anne, and in fairness, Anne did her best to continue the line, falling pregnant no less than 18 times. But not one of her children survived to full maturity, which brings us to this print. In monetary terms, not particularly valuable, but in historic terms, one of the most important. For this is a print of William, Duke of Gloucester, Anne's son, who was born in 1689 and was carried away by smallpox, aged just 11 in 1700. Which brings us to myth number 4. The Act of Union of 1707 was a response to the failure of the Darien scheme. The Darien scheme was indeed a commercial disaster on a scale comparable with the collapse of RBS 10 years ago, as a large part of Scotland's wealth sunk into a mosquito-infested swamp in the Isthmus of Panama. But do you really give up your parliament and your sovereignty because of a financial crisis? If so, this could be the only case in history where this has happened. No. The event that precipitated the suspension of the Scottish Parliament was the death of this boy, William, Duke of Gloucester, because his demise removed the last hope of a smooth Protestant Stuart succession to the British throne and precipitated a constitutional crisis. Who would now succeed Queen Anne? The English Parliament answered this question by passing the Act of Settlement in the year after the death of the young Duke, prohibiting a Catholic succession and decreeing that the throne of England would pass to Sophia, Electress of Hanover, and her Protestant heirs. However, this act applied only in England. Scotland's separate parliament remained loyal to the ancient Scottish Stuart dynasty. So there arose the nightmare possibility of a fracture of the union of the crowns. And so the Scottish Parliament was prorogued by the Act of Union of 1707. Henceforward, the King of the Scots would be determined by the Palace of Westminster. Problem solved, or so it would seem. As for Queen Anne, she discovered the bitter truth of the ancient biblical adage, She who troubleth her own house shall inherit the wind. In later life, the tragic queen came to believe that the death of her children was a curse visited upon her by the Almighty because she had betrayed her own father.